I'm Jim Wiseman, president of Iactp. Very excited to have you folks on this webinar this morning. This is one we do webinars every quarter as an association. This is one we've added basically because of request, because we had a lot of questions, and the folks from Ohio received an award during our conference last fall in Omaha, Nebraska. And there's been a lot of questions, comments about this program that they've started in Ohio, and so they're going to do this webinar for us this morning. Just to reiterate a few logistical things, if you haven't done so already, if you're not talking, please click on the microphone or telephone to the left of your name and mute yourself if you're not talking, so we don't hear your background noise. And also, please feel free to chat your questions, who you are, where you're from, in the chat box. And if you have a question, let us know and we'll get to you. And if you want to verbalize that question on your audio, that's great as well. We'll call on you if you want us to call on you. So that's just a few of the logistical things that I need to mention this morning. And with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Beth Krieger. And Beth is a unit supervisor, academy unit supervisor with the Ohio Corrections Training Academy. And she is joined today by Matt Wells, who's program specialist for the Ohio Department of Education. They've got this partnership going. It sounds like a great thing in Ohio. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to them and let them share with us what they've got for us this morning. Beth.
All right, thanks, Jim. Good morning, everybody. As Jim said, my name's Beth Krieger. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio. In the room with me is Matt Wells, and I'll have Matt quickly introduce himself here shortly. I also have Scott Tharp, who is one of our program managers here in Ohio at the Corrections Training Academy, monitoring the chat function on GoToMeeting. If you have questions or comments, please chat them. Scott will give us kind of a high sign that somebody has a question, and then we will answer your question. So again, I work here at the Corrections Training Academy in Ohio. I oversee our new employee orientation program. We partnered with the Ohio Department of Education over a year ago, and like Jim said, we're getting ready to basically just kind of give you guys an overview of how this process works, what we did, some of the barriers that we face, and really open this up for Q&A as we've had a lot of questions via email and on telephone. So Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Wells. I am the Education Program Specialist for the Ohio Department of Education. I actually manage all the law enforcement, fire, EMS, health science, and human services programs for all of our high school career tech centers in the state. That's several hundred school districts. We are a very populated state, and so we do have a lot of those types of programs. So I'll be kind of talking about the Ohio Department of Education side, and I have a sort of a unique history in that this is about my fourth state agency. I'm a little bit of a bureaucrat. One of the second agency that I worked at was Department of Corrections. I was a correctional officer and investigator and so forth. So I'm a bit of a unique animal in that I have some background with that. And we'll talk about some of that later on as far as challenges on the Department of Education side with lack of knowledge about corrections.
All right, thank you. Why is this moving? Can you hit the right arrow button for me, please, on the... We had this working a second ago. All right, of course, we're going to have some technical issues here. I'm going to just go ahead with the next slide as Matt and Scott maybe try to figure out this. This is going to be a pretty informal presentation. We're really hoping that you guys will interact and engage with us so that we can answer any questions that you have. So some of the things we're going to talk about how did these conversations get started. We're going to identify some of the barriers that we had and how did we overcome those barriers. We're going to talk about the development of the program. What is the follow through? Where do we go now? And basically a Q&A. So can somebody chat in the chat box if you guys can see the slide that has the objectives on it? I just want to make sure that you guys are seeing what you should be. Scott, can you let me know if somebody says yes, they're seeing that?
Beth, there's
okay.
Google. Yep.
Okay. All right, good. All right, so the next slide, we're going to start actually where we ended up about a month ago or so. Right now, the Corrections Training Academy hosted a career day for about 230 high school vocational students in and around Ohio. We had 8 schools represented, and we had over 300 folks registered. Unfortunately, we had some pretty bad weather on the day that we hosted this, so we only had 230 students show up. We allowed these high school students who you see in this picture here to go over and tour one of our facilities. We had them meet with our human resources department. We had a panel discussion that we had the CO of the years participate in. So these folks, high school folks that were coming to the academy that day, had the opportunity to basically ask current correction officers anything they wanted to know about corrections. We also had a correction officer of the year, or sometimes 2, assigned with every group. So not only did these folks have a formal discussion, they were also able to have informal discussions and get to know the correction officers that were there to kind of help them through the process.
So we kind of want to do a bit of a chronological event today for you folks. And so we kind of want to talk about one of your first challenges, and that is just how do I get the conversation started with the agencies? And so we kind of identified a few of the agencies that are players at the table, obviously Department of Corrections, Department of Education, but also trying to involve your career tech planning districts. And so just for clarification on some of the verbiage, a lot of folks refer to these as our VOTEC or vocational schools or joint vocational districts. Those are kind of old, that's sort of old verbiage. And so what we call them now is career tech planning districts or career tech educational centers. And then also involving your Department of Youth Services. Those are some of the main players that you'll need in the room for the conversation. So I will tell you that as I came into my current position at Department of Education, it was about 5 years ago. All of your states obviously have Department of Educations, and all of those Department of Educations have some sort of department inside of them that deals directly with trade and industry and career technical education. All of your states also take some type of federal funding, whether it's Carl Perkins or they actually have to fall under what we call ESSA, what most folks refer to as the No Child Left Behind under the Bush administration has now been morphed into a new policy, which is called ESSA, which stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. And that's been renewed in the last couple administrations, including the Trump administration. And so that has a lot of mandates for all of your states on the education side that drives a lot of the programming and drives a lot of the money. One is connected to the other, obviously. And so as I came into my position 5 years ago, I started looking at the areas that I manage. And law enforcement for high school programs was very, very weak. And so as I have a history with corrections, and I started to reach out with some folks, I said, you know, as I did sort of a unscientific audit, if you will, to those programs, asking them, what are they doing? What kind of industry credentials are those students leaving their high school with? And I really found there to be a huge gap. And so I reached out to some of our correctional folks in the Department of Education, in career tech education, and in the trade and industry division. We actually have a liaison in our office that deals with the adult correctional education. And so a lot of you are very familiar with the fact that you have adult career tech education in a lot of your correctional facilities. And I started in that area and said, hey, do you have, first of all, I want to see what are you offering as far as your curriculum? And then perhaps maybe you could give me somebody that I could talk to. And so they connected me with a gentleman who was the director at the time, was Ernie Moore, and just instantly had nothing but cooperation, said, yes, we'd love to meet with you and talk about it. So it really was a bit of a cold call, if you will. So your first folks at the table, obviously we're talking to a lot of our correction side, and I know there's a few folks from education on as well. But from a correctional standpoint, just reaching out to your Department of Education, or perhaps reaching out to somebody in your facility that deals with your current adult education, there's typically a high school counterpart that they could hook you up with. And so that was kind of the first a barrier, was just trying to figure out who should we be bringing to the table? How do I contact those folks? And sometimes it's just a good old-fashioned cold call to say, hey, who in your agency deals with any type of education or career tech education? And they will be able to direct you pretty quickly.
Oops. So this is just, we're interspersing some of our career day pictures. We had the high school students participate in our scenario-based training. So this is just an example of two of the high school students. You can see the person on the left. These vocational high school students came here to the academy dressed in full uniform, which was a little shocking to some of the people that were here for the Correction Officer of the Year that were helping out. And we'll talk about the students and their dress and whatnot here shortly. So as Matt said, we had to identify who some of the people were that we needed to bring to the table to get these initial discussions started. Obviously, Matt came and, like he said, he really almost made a cold call and reached out to our superintendent at the time and said, you know, hey, this is something we should do. Myself and my staff were brought in, and we started working with Matt over a year ago to start putting all of this together. One of the very first things that we did, getting buy-in from our staff here and getting buy-in from the institutions was really, really important. And I wanted to make sure that at the academy, our academy staff had a very clear understanding of these folks that we were going to be hiring, what kind of training are they getting. So we immediately went out and visited 8 or 9 of the career technical schools throughout the state of Ohio. And to be honest with you, we were completely blown away. And I think that's really what gave us the steam to continue to move forward. We also had to reach out to our human resources. Ohio's a big state. We have 12,000 employees, 50,000 inmates, 27 prisons. We're a big organization. So one of the things that was extremely, extremely important was to reach out to our human resources at our central office, as well as our local human resources folks, because, you know, there were some issues with, you know, hey, if they haven't graduated high school, they don't pass minimum qualifications yet. So we were able to work with human resources and our Department of Administrative Services to basically get a box put on our application, so that if somebody's currently enrolled in this program, they can apply for the job, go through our assessment process, and have a start date before they even graduate. So obviously, human resources, extremely, extremely important piece of putting all of this together. We also had some legal hurdles to overcome. And Matt, do you want to talk about the statute and the law that allows for the underage kids?
Right. And so we'll talk a little bit more in depth in a few topics down, but when we identified some of the barriers, what we feel and what we see very commonly in the Department of Education as we deal with our industry partners like Department of Corrections, again, we support about 18 career fields that are designated from the federal government for us, and also Ohio is not unique in that all of your states too fall under all those mandates as well. When we deal with those agencies, we get a lot of the same type of misconceptions, and that is, oh my gosh, we don't want to deal with high school students that are underage. Can they be in my shop? Can they be in my hospital? Can they be in my correctional facility? What's the insurance barriers to that? What's the legal barriers to that? What's the minor employment laws that go along with that? And so in Ohio, this is one thing that's specific, but it is spun off of the federal mandates. And so I would suspect that most of your states have something along the same lines. And that is, Ohio has some what we call pre-apprenticeship laws that allow for underage high school participants to be able to be excluded from a lot of those minor laws. And so that has really helped us, one. But two, as we go forward, and we talk a little bit later about some of the barriers, obviously that's going to be one of your biggest barriers on both sides, both education and your industry side is, can we use high school students to do this work with? And that's why we started with, as Beth said, we started with the tours on this side to say, hey, this is what we can offer you. And so there's an educational piece both on the industry side, and there's an educational piece on the Department of Education side that says, hey, this is what we can offer. Oh, we didn't even realize that. And so when we started having those conversations, we get a lot of that feedback was, we never even knew this existed. And so there's a lot of responsibility on both sides to really help bring folks up to speed, which if we move to the next slide, I can tell you from the Department of Education side, it's not unlike any other state agency. We have a lot of what we call alphabet soup. So we have a lot of nomenclature and slang and things that we just assume everybody in the world knows, and that's really not reality. The first piece that I started with is that we really need to align and see what the standards are. So again, based on the same federal standards that we have to live by and your states of education also have to live by, we have standards and we have courses, and they're designed based off of industry credentials and industry standards. So I looked at what we had. In Ohio, we had already developed a course for corrections that fell underneath the public safety pathway. And so we had, and you certainly will potentially have career tech education programs that are already running in your state. So they've probably already developed standards, and they've already developed some type of competencies, and they've aligned those with some type of end of course assessment. Again, all of those are federal mandates that they have to, that they actually have to adhere to. So one of the things that I felt like I needed to do on this side was to give what we call a career tech education, or CTE 101, bring our folks on this side of the table up to speed on what is it with career tech, what's a graduation requirement, what do students have to fulfill to get into a program, to get out of a program, to successfully graduate high school in the state of Ohio, and then how does corrections actually fall into that. And so one of the biggest pieces, again, another federal mandate, was credentialing. So as we got into this process and realized, hey, we're kind of already ahead of the game. We have a course, we have standards. Somebody prior to me even aligned those standards to to the correctional folks here. I don't know if there was a partnership or a program that existed prior to us. We can't really, we haven't historically been able to find that. But they've obviously collaborated somehow, officially or unofficially, and those standards were very, very well aligned. And then we had to create some type of credential, because the federal mandates are saying, hey, if we're going to give money for career tech education, there has to be a payoff at the end. These students have to leave the facilities with something that will actually let them go on to college or some type of post-secondary education or technical education, and perhaps go on to some type of career, or a combination of both. And so I reached out again to Beth and said, hey, we have to come up with some sort of provisional credential. And so we put our heads together. Ohio has a very easy electronic application process. Again, based on the federal standard, we have to show employability, we have to show sustainability, we have to show that these jobs are in demand. We're not just going to throw money towards something that can't prove sustainability or employability. So we're easily able to do that. We brought job descriptions. It's a state agency, so we were able to get onto our state hiring process, pull off the job description, pull off the Ohio Means Jobs, which is another one of our state agencies that shows employable situations in our states, that shows forecast of, hey, corrections is growing by 15% over the next 10 years. It's a $19 an hour starting position. So it's employable, it's sustainable. There are positions out there. And so we added that to the application. It goes through a vetting process on the Department of Education side, and it washed out on the other side, which was, we do have on our approved list with a numerical value of 12, which will lead these students to a graduation requirement. Now has a Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction provisional correctional certification. And so that was a little bit of a process. It was more paperwork than anything else. We did have to, our vetting process puts industry experts, a panel together that review those credentials. And again, it is on the list, and that did help drive it for our districts. Once we put it on the list, we really had to be prepared because we started getting the phone calls and people wanted to start becoming involved, because now this is a true bona fide process that students can be involved in, and it will lead them to a graduation requirement. So we really needed to establish a point person for our agency, which, was obviously, I guess I sort of self-appointed, and that is my job title. And so that was pretty easy. And then obviously Beth on the other side was our point agency, point person for Department of Corrections agency. So that makes a big difference. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further down as far as our struggles. And that was actually one of our first and foremost barriers was appointing that agency point person. So some things kind of fell through the cracks, but we'll talk about that after Beth kind of talks about, oh, okay, we got another picture. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, so we just about every 3 or 4 slides, we're just throwing in a picture just to kind of show off what we did for our corrections career day. We talked about a little bit about some of these. So as Matt just got done talking about kind of the Department of Education side, the Corrections Training Academy side, we identified a point person who was actually our former superintendent. And like Matt said, one of the barriers that we had was actually our superintendent left. So there was a little bit of a lull in the progress that we made, just simply because we didn't have that point person fully established before we had a change in our administration. One of the other things that we did was we provided our entire new employee orientation curricula to the Department of Education so they could assess it and determine how much of what we teach in our basic academy aligns with standards that they already have in place. So they were able to, we shared that through a SharePoint, and they were able to evaluate that and make a determination of new things or different things that need to be discussed or taught in the certification program that we were establishing.
Yeah, so some of the barriers that, if you want to just move forward one, so some of the barriers that kind of jumped out at us right away, and then some of them that we learned as we got through or most of the way through the process. And so this, I think, is kind of a valuable piece to kind of keep you from falling into some of the pitfalls that we did. And the first one was, and I know it seems silly and obvious, but is establish and build relationships. As Beth will tell you, we probably had 3 meetings with lots of folks in the room, and Beth and I really never even made connection until well after the superintendent change. And so we fell through the cracks a little bit in that we didn't initially put a point person in place more on an official basis. We should have definitely had a more defined team on both sides of the table, and things I think probably could have sped up around about a 6-month time period. And then understanding how to actually get a hold of that person, whether it's through email or through phone calls or a combination of both, because you're going to really be doing a lot of work with that person or that team. And so you really need to have a very good relationship and accessibility to those folks. And then the next one was that we were really having trouble breaking paradigms or preconceived notions. I would tell you that from the Department of Education side, the reason that it never moved forward all those years is because there's a really big preconceived notion about high school students being around, and if you could see that, quote, bad people. We don't want our high school students to be around convicted felons or, whatever that was in those folks' mind downtown that says, oh my goodness, we can't put our young children around murderers. And so that was one of the things that we sort of had to overcome. And again, the way to do that is to understand what those students are being trained in, and going through some of the facility tours on the Department of Corrections side. So we bringing some of your education folks out and showing them what the real life is out there could definitely help with that. And then I actually played a big role in that, in saying, listen, this is what we're preparing these students for, whether that's police officers or Homeland Security or emergency dispatchers. We're preparing them for this occupation. And so as we were able to have those conversations, we were able to alleviate a lot of the concerns on our side. And then on Department of Corrections side is they never even knew that these programs existed. For a correctional person to say, oh, yeah, let's go hire some high school students right out of high school, it'll be great. And so, as Beth said earlier, we connected and went out to about 6 different career tech education facilities, and they were instantly, like she said, they were blown away to see how those situations were very paramilitary. They were all in uniform. They were all expected to be in a particular grooming situation. It is extremely paramilitary out into those organizations. And I would say right now, just the unofficial number, we probably have about close to 100 programs, maybe a little less, all over the state of Ohio that run currently. And so that's a really great pool of applicants to be able to pull from. So we were able to identify those barriers pretty quickly just by going out and looking at each other's facilities. And then the last one there is just really, we should have established more clear work groups right off the bat. There's a lot of things to do logistically to form groups that would work perhaps with legal and HR and work with the credentialing process, work with the alignment standards process. So there's 4 or 5 or 6 buckets of work there that we could have assigned to work groups, divide and conquer, and made things easy. And then that communication piece, of course, we have 2 state agencies, and which expanded to 2 and 3 and 4 state agencies that perhaps are going to be involved here. So communication is really the key and was a barrier that we were able to overcome.
And this is just another picture of our career day. So Matt's kind of talked a little bit about our barriers. One thing that we did was we made a plan. We thought we had a really good plan, but again, we had some challenges and some barriers that we didn't really expect to come up. But in the future, when we decide to continue to move forward, or if we, one of the things that we're looking at is being able to recruit other folks that are in the vocational schools for other positions within our institutions. Obviously, we have healthcare positions and teaching education positions. There are a lot of different positions that we could actually pull from these vocational schools and get these folks on board and establish credentialing programs for them. So in moving forward, identifying the multi-agency team included on our team was the DRC folks, the Department of Education folks. We had our facility folks, but one area that we probably could have done better is really developed a team of folks, like Matt said, involving different institutions from around our state, so that the buy-in was a little bit easier, and being able to sell it to our facilities would have been a little easier, because it wasn't just Beth and Matt and a couple of academy staff going out and saying, hey, this is a really great program. Identifying some of the challenges, obviously, you know, this being extremely new to our agency, we really didn't even know what challenges we were going to face. But one of the things that happened was, for about 6 or 8 months, things moved at a snail's pace. And then after those 6 or 8 months, all of a sudden, once Matt and I realized, hey, we're going to be the point people, let's run with this, things started happening like at lightning speed. So we really didn't plan for that. However, everything has worked out. We looked at what we wanted our final product to be. Our goal, our end goal, is to have these high school students that are certified in corrections able to walk out of high school on a Friday and graduate and start here at the academy on a Monday. That was our end goal. We have extremely high turnover rates. We have retention issues in some of our facilities, and knowing that these high school students are going through our new employee curriculum over a 2-year period of time was something that was extremely exciting to us, that we're going to get candidates for employment that actually have been trained and certified, so to speak, in corrections. Assigning the tasks and the timelines, again, I don't know that we did a very good job of assigning the tasks and the timelines. Matt and I just kind of said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's look at the calendar. Let's pick a date. We're going to do a train the trainer for the teachers. We're going to go out and visit the school. So it wasn't very structured. And looking back, we should have had it more structured. And identifying the pilot programs, I think we did a decent job of that when our staff here at the Academy went out with Matt to the field to visit some of the high schools. We had some high schools that were immediately jumping up and down saying, pick me, pick me. We want to be the pilot, because they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 prisons within an hour proximity of the schools. So that's really what you need to do in order to start the development of your program.
Yeah, I would say certainly getting yourself in a room and starting to just throw ideas out. Again, identifying some of your obvious challenges. You knew right away that obviously when you put multiple state agencies involved, there's going to be legal issues, there's going to be HR issues. And so how do we, start to address those types of challenges right away? And so I think we were pretty good about that process. I think the timeline, obviously it actually falls into one of the barriers, believe it or not, because if you start this out and the very first thing you do is establish and put on your state's Department of Education approved industry credential, and you put your provisional correctional certificate on that list, it will absolutely grow overnight. So if you put that on first and you don't have the standards aligned and you don't have the process in place to train the trainer for your instructors, and you don't know what your pilot program is, you're going to have 1 million people blowing up your phone saying, how do we get involved? How do we get involved? Tell us about your process. And so it's very important for that timeline to be established. And I'll show you one of the very last slides. Will kind of show you a flow chart of maybe how this should actually go. Because again, if you get one step a little bit out of line, it could really wreak a lot of havoc on the process. And so for us, it was about again, in that specific standards alignment piece, we really needed to do, for us and our state agency for Department of Education, and part of that federal standard is we had to have an end of course assessment. Every one of our career tech courses have to end with some type of assessment to be able to prove the student's competency. And so we put all those standards together and identified the gaps right away. And then if we needed to add any of those standards, we were able to revise those pretty quickly. We put a lot of the industry folks in a room, perhaps, and then that's how we actually do our standards revision piece. There is a little bit of a public comment period, but it's not cumbersome, and it's not very long, so it doesn't really stall the process. And then again, if we have to make any major standard revisions, then we have to obviously change the end of course assessment. Ohio was very fortunate in that we didn't have to make a lot of changes because somebody had already done that process before us, and there were not major changes that needed to be made. If in fact you have to make those changes, it can stall this process just a little bit. So one of the first things that you want to look at, again, and you'll see in our flow chart, one of the first things that you really want to get out ahead of is making sure you guys are speaking the same language when it comes to the standards. And if not, you have to fix that process first.
There's just another picture of our career day, one of the students, high school students, participating in one of our scenarios. So we've kind of alluded to the fact that we did a train the trainer. Matt sent an email out to all of the career tech schools saying, if you're interested in the corrections industry credentials, we need you to come to the Corrections Training Academy for 2 days and learn their curriculum, how they teach, the mission of the organization, and whatnot. So we had about 25 folks that came here for 2 days in August.
And initially we thought we were going to maybe just get 10. We were thinking we're just going to do the pilot program. We're just going to hopefully get 10 and we'll roll this out slowly. And it was an overwhelming amount of support. And so I will tell you again, from a Department of Education and the federal standards side, we are obligated by those federal standards to provide professional development. And professional development is defined as multiple day training that builds from one day to the next. And so if you're thinking to yourself already, like, how am I going to get all these teachers to come? Will there be the interest? They have to have the interest. And when we did it, we actually were able to give them some contact hours on the Department of Ed side. And so we were killing a lot of birds with just a minimum amount of stones.
When we brought the teachers in, our basic goal was not to teach them how to teach, but rather just give them a high-level overview of what it is that we do here at the Corrections Training Academy. So Matt provided the teachers with the standards that they currently have, and we compared that to our new employee orientation curriculum. We had the teachers go through our scenario-based training. We gave them a tour of the facility because, again, part of that 2-day training that we did was building relationships so that, the students or the teachers could go back to the students and say, hey, if you get hired with corrections, you're going to go down to the training academy. This is what the dorms look like. This is what this is what you are going to be doing when you're there. And it's not because someone told me, it's because we actually went through the training. We let them know that our main focus in our organization is we want everybody to go home safe at night. We have a really high concentration of rehabilitation and reentry type training in our new employee orientation program. We're not as heavy on the custody side, and we're not a lock and feed organization. So we wanted to make sure that the instructors had a clear picture. So when a student says, I want to go work in prison so I can beat people up and put people in segregation, we wanted to make sure that these teachers understood that is not the mission of our organization. The other thing that it did was quite honestly, it just opened the lines of communications, and we were able to put faces with names. So as Matt alluded to a little earlier, I had teachers coming up to me and saying, hey, I teach up in Cleveland, which is in Northeast Ohio. There are 3 prisons that are pretty close to me. How do I get connected? So I went up to the institutions, sat down with the teachers, the administrators, the wardens, and the other executive staff at the facility, and basically said, hey, these are the career tech schools in your area. This is the warden. This is HR. They can put a face with a name. So now when Beth Krieger calls up to Lorraine Correctional, I can say, hey, Mrs. HR Smith, remember me? I met you at the career tech meeting, and the discussions of who they're going to hire and how they're going to hire and the process, they have a face with a name. So again, it just goes back to establishing those relationships. We had such an overwhelming response that we actually are going to be running another session in the spring with probably another 25 schools that are interested in the corrections industry credentials.
And if you're doing the math, even Common Core math, that's going to be close to 50 or so, maybe a little more than 50 programs. Each one of those programs are going to potentially produce every 2 years, 100 students. It's typically 25 juniors, 25 seniors. And so you are talking about 50 to 55 programs producing upwards to 100 students in a 2-year cycle per program of absolutely locked on, educated, ready to go employees for your agency. If that's an employee pool that interests you, I think we might be barking up the right tree here. So in that train the trainer process, it really was about trying to figure out how to put the Department of Correction and the Department of Education spin on this marriage. And we had nothing but good results from that. We actually put together some specific Department of Education training. They put together some of the Department of Corrections training, and it was just a really great marriage. And from that point, even this week, it actually created a listserv of instructors, and they came up. Beth sent out an email saying, hey, we've got some old cell doors and potentially some old correctional furniture. Does anybody want that? And we had schools that instantly emailed back and actually picked up old cell doors, training aids. And so there's just a lot of really positive stuff that has spin off of just the train the trainer process already. So it has really created an amazing amount of communication between all the agencies.
So the students that are eligible, anybody who graduates from this program is eligible to be hired for our organization or hired into our organization. Again, they're able to take the assessment test, go through the interview process, and get a start date before they graduate. The only requirement to actually start working with our organization is the age requirement, and obviously the high school diploma. They have to be 18 when they come to work for our agency. However, if in, let's just say in April, they want to apply, the teacher is endorsing them saying, yes, this person's on target to graduate, they can go ahead and apply at 17, and if they turn 18 in July, we can give them a start date right after they turn 18. They have to participate in the course, obviously, and successfully graduate, pass all the assessments. But one thing that we worked out with our HR department, we get thousands of people that apply for our jobs here in DRC. So when they check the box, the high school students check the box saying, I'm in the corrections industry credentialing program through a vocational school, they are guaranteed an interview with the warden at the facility or facilities of their choice. And the warden is going to know when they walk in that this is a person who is on target to graduate or has graduated from this program. It doesn't mean that they're guaranteed a job. It just means that they're guaranteed to be able to at least get some face-to-face time with the warden.
And so from the Department of Education side, they do have to fulfill that course with a C or better. They also have to have the end of course assessment, which we call web exams. I noticed you went past that picture quickly. That was Beth Krieger for everyone that's watching there. They have to fulfill those web exams or those end of course assessments. And with that, in the state of Ohio, oddly enough, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that also leads them to some guaranteed articulated credit to higher education or post-secondary, to some type of technical junior college or public university. And so there's a lot of really great things about that. In the state of Ohio, if they get hired, they also have the day one benefit of not only the hourly wage, but we also have tuition reimbursement for those students of $4,000 in a calendar year to go back to any institution for any degree for tuition reimbursement. So a really great benefit for those students that are potentially going to move on.
Did you do that slide?
Oh, so the industry curriculum. No, actually, this is a piece again that's extremely important. This is the final piece of the puzzle that again is federally mandated for us. We wanted to be able to have these students walk out of their educational process with an industry credential. And so in the state of Ohio, and I would think that most of your states are going to be doing something that's very close to this again, because it is a federal mandate. We had to define the credential, and so on our side, it was pretty easy. It was just going to be a provisional certificate, and then we had to figure out what those triggers were going to be. They had to complete the course. There had to be a grade point in there. There had to be an end of course assessment, and then at the end of the day, there has to be for us, it's a physical piece of paper that says, hey, it was essentially just the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections certificate that had a watermark of provisional through it, so it doesn't have to necessarily be fancy. And then we had to define how that student earned it, of course, which we already had that pre-established process. I assume your state's Department of Education's will as well. For other credentials, whether it be D11 welding or NCCR construction, those are all things that they already have pre-established. So this is not something that you're going to have to reinvent. It's already in process for the Department of Education. And then what exactly is it that this credential is going to guarantee for the student? And Beth has already told you what that's going to be. Is there a cost involved? And who's actually going to keep the custody of records on that? And that's something that we haven't ironed out at this point. Right now, there's no cost associated to our students. That's the best process that we can provide. But in the state of Ohio, our legislatures over the last couple of months have passed a budget bill, and in that budget bill, they've allotted $50 million additional dollars for this industry credentialing process for career tech students. We're getting $25 million specifically for our career tech education folks, and so that's a pretty big pot of money. And again, those are federal dollars and state dollars that flow to our educational process. And so I would tell you that we try to reduce the cost for our students if we can, and for our districts, they're more apt to be involved in it. And then the records are going to be kept based on the students' transcripts. So that kind of, takes care of itself, as well as Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections has also committed to putting a box on their application process that says, I am in fact a career tech graduate. That will start the preference points for them, as well as we want to be able to come back to that student in 6 and 12 months upon post-hiring, just to kind of get an idea of, were you prepared? Look at the retention process with this particular program so that we can come back in 3 or 4 years and say, hey, look at the retention. We hope to see that in the high 80% or better. And then to kind of see the upward mobility of those types of students, to see if perhaps they do in fact promote and move their way through the process. So we're trying to track those folks. And so some of the records will be kept on the Department of Education side, some will be kept by the student, and certainly some will be kept by Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections.
So here's just another picture. This is the panel discussion that we did. We had like 15 or so folks that were involved in the panel discussions during our career day. We had them, the students, hitting different stations throughout the day. One of the really, really important pieces that I think we maybe missed the boat on in the very beginning and now really understand the importance of it was the marketing piece. Matt talked a little bit about having all of your ducks in a row before you start the marketing, which is really, really important. And just an example, like Matt said, we had some cell doors. Actually, we had about 50 cell doors that we were going to send to our recycling and get rid of them because they were putting new cell doors in one of our facilities. Well, I offered up a cell door to somebody, and that spread like wildfire. And we did not have a process in place for these facilities to go pick, or these high schools to go pick up these doors. So we learned real quickly that if we're going to offer something, we need to have a plan on how we're going to execute and follow through with whatever we're offering. We had actually, and I'll send this out to Michael, I'll send it to you, and if you can send it to the participants, that would be fantastic. There was a really nice write-up in one of our local newspapers about these industry credentials in one of the programs at one of the vocational schools. There's also, the teacher had some really nice comments in there, and then they actually interviewed some of the students. So I'll send that out so you can see that. The career day, we had planned on about 125 folks. You know, we were thinking give or take. Well, we ended up with over 300 registered. We were, again, not prepared for that. One of the other things we weren't prepared for was ICE in the morning, which we had an agenda plan from start to finish, starting at 9 a.m. and running until 3. And we had schools that didn't show up until 10:30. So we were able to just kind of sit back and punt, but lesson learned, we need to maybe have a little bit more of a flexible schedule because school districts may get put on delays. Just, again, something that we didn't consider. Facilitating the local tours, I already touched on this a little bit, but I want to just emphasize the importance of that relationship building. Our staff here at the Academy went out, we visited the schools. We also have made connections with a lot of our HR folks and wardens and other executive staff to make arrangements for those personal visits. So the high school administration, they're going to the facilities. That makes them feel a little bit better about sending the high school students into the institution when they see it's not complete chaos inside the institution. You know, the students, while they're not completely sheltered and they will have inmate contact, it isn't just a free-for-all, you know, 1,000 inmates walking around and everybody fighting or trying to pick fights with the students. So we felt that it was really important because some of the boards of education were not real keen on allowing these high school students to come down here for this career day because they knew that we were going to be sending these folks inside the prison. So again, just that education piece of making sure that everybody's on the same page on both sides of the fence, literally, you know, inside and outside. So that marketing piece, again, there are some things we would have done differently. However, it is extremely important that you have all your ducks in a row before you start marketing because, like Matt said, it took off like wildfire literally overnight.
And if I could just go back for just a quick second and talk just another piece that I think is really important about the industry credential. In the state of Ohio, and this is unique to Ohio, but I would also think that, again, based off of federal mandates, our industry credentials in the state of Ohio are directly attached to graduation requirements. So we have 3 options for graduation in the state of Ohio. We have a traditional way, which is all your academics, 5 electives, and an end of course test, an Ohio graduation test that they have to pass. And then there's the second option is again all your academics, your 5 electives, and an ACT or SAT beyond remediation. And then we've created over the last year a third option based on the federal regulations, and that is all your academics, your 5 electives, and an industry credential that has a 12-point value, which our provisional correctional certificate does have a 12-point value. And they have to do an ACTE work keys, which is an industry-specific test process for some math, some reading for location, and there's some other pieces to that. There's 3 areas. There's a logistic area as well. And they can actually use that process to graduate high school. So this industry credential now is potentially attached to a career tech education student's graduation in the state of Ohio. So that's really, really important. That becomes a gold standard for a lot of our programs. And that did, in fact, drive the programming for a lot of our local education facilities that said, hey, it's a 12-point industry credential. We want to be a part of it. So really the future, as we develop our plan for down the road and around the corner, one of the things that, again, is a federal mandate for us is, for the Department of Education side, is really pushing pre-apprenticeship. We want students to be out there in the industry prior to graduation. We actually give them credit, high school credit, for their pre-apprenticeship. This is above and beyond or secondary to the industry credential. They can actually get high school credit for the pre-apprenticeship. We have started the conversation with one of our institutions in the state of Ohio for pre-apprenticeship. It's going to start even with underage students that are 17, but they will be very limited. It'll be perimeter, visiting, entry, control center, places where they're not going to be having necessarily direct contact with inmates. And so we're going to start that process here for the next school year. Articulation to post-secondary. Again, another federal mandate that says we have to have some sort of clear-cut pathway to technical school, college, university of some sort. And so in the state of Ohio, this particular correctional course does have attachment to what we call a C-tag, or a career tech articulation guide. That does allow that student, if they in fact complete with a C or better, they do in fact have their end of course assessment, they will get 3 semester credits for that course to any public institution in the state of Ohio. That is really important. And also, as they become part of the association or the institution or a part of Department of Corrections, our OCSEA union has a benefit with some of our junior colleges in the state that allow for an associate's degree, and most of it will be paid for through that union benefit. So this student's going to come out of high school with 3 articulated credits, come into the institution, be hired with a good hourly rate that's a sustainable wage, and move on to a post-secondary situation that's going to have a $4,000 guaranteed benefit every year, and a union benefit that says an associate's degree, and again, with the articulated credit from our side with 3 semester credits. It's an amazing, amazing opportunity for our students in the state of Ohio. And then down the road and around the corner, a lot of our correctional staff here at the training center has already said, listen, we've seen these students, we know what they're about. They're going to be getting over 1,150 hours of instructional education in a 2-year process coming out of high school. When they come to the academy, the very first thing that it's already started doing is having conversation with the academy staff to say, how are we going to handle these students? It seems like a really great thing on the surface. The reality is you now have really, really high achieving students that are going to be walking through your door, and they're going to be pressing your academy staff to give us something more. And so that's a great problem to have. but at the same time, it is going to be a challenge. And so what we had considered, and potentially our first group is going to be coming out this May 2020, we're going to be seeing our first graduating class out of the high schools coming to the institutions, coming to the academy. We have a feeling that there's probably going to be some type of an abbreviated academy down the road for these students. They're going to come out with, I mean, amazing amount more education and experience. And so to have them at the academy for 4, 6, or 8 weeks, depending on what your academy is in your states, certainly you're going to be looking at an abbreviated, potentially an abbreviated situation. That's a win-win situation for everybody. If we can get these students turned around and get them to the institution, that's less gas, tires, and oil for everyone. And that's putting people into the actual institutions faster. We wanted to make sure that it's safe, and we want to make sure that those students are prepared for success as they go forward. But again, these are things that we're thinking about down the road and around the corner for our future for this program. And so one of the other things that we talked about is a succession plan. If in fact that myself or Beth or Scott or Mark or a handful of other folks that are involved in this program win the lottery tomorrow, we want to make sure that this is going to move forward in some sort of fashion for both agencies. And so for us on the Department of Education side, we already have the industry credential there. We already have the standards and the competencies and the courses. They're already established. They're going to be there forever, and they're going to be revised on a 5-year process. On the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections side, looking to establish more policies, or at least something in writing that says, here's what this program is. There should always be somebody assigned to it, and it'll always be part of the agency moving forward. And so a lot of that's still going to have to be put down into writing. We're going to lean on HR and legal a little bit for that. But that's one of the things that we think for the future of this program is really going to, again, if we get hit by a bus or win the lottery tomorrow, we want this to move forward. So follow through is a big piece for us. In state agencies, that's not something that we see a lot of. When you add 2 and 3 and 4 state agencies together, sometimes things get fall through the cracks. And again, as we talked about from the very get-go of this presentation, is we didn't start things necessarily the way we should have. And so we're hoping that we're going to give you that education so that you don't make those same mistakes. But it definitely hurt us when it came to the follow-through part of it. So timelines, expectations, teams, goals, and that communication is absolutely imperative. But having those policies and succession plans in place for who's going to be the next person if Beth gets promoted or I retire or whatever that might be, we need to have that paperwork in place and those policies in place and those point people named, whether it's by actual name or position. That's something that's going to be imperative for the success and the future of this program. So the last couple slides are just some infographics that kind of show there's a lot of spokes here. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of the boxes. Again, these are a lot of the pieces that you're going to have to work with. The next slide is going to show you sort of the flow chart of what we want to see, what we think you should be doing as you go forward, kind of in a chronological order. And you can see, again, the standards alignments up there at the very top, identifying some of those really key players in the correctional and the educational process is definitely going to be key. And then again, once you get that get that good foundation under you, you're definitely going to want to start working on that industry credential and the hiring process. Once those two last pieces of element go into place, it's gonna light a fire, and it's gonna become intrinsic at some point that you're not going to be able to stop it. So the marketing piece and the future of it is really going to be important. Again, these slides are going to be available for everyone. This is myself. This is all my contact information. Please feel free to blow up that email. I'm very good about trying to get back to you. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me is by email. I am also committed that, again, I've talked to Rhode Island. I've talked to some folks from Missouri, Wyoming, Delaware. If in fact you want me to come out and help you talk with your agencies, or if you're having some challenges that we would need to come out and talk face-to-face into meetings with any of your administration or higher ups, we'd be more than happy to do that. My state definitely supports that. we're all on the same team. So that's my commitment to you. I thank everybody for their time, for coming today and signing on. I know everybody's time is valuable. And if we have some questions, we can get to that. Beth, do you want to finish up on your side?
Thanks, Matt. My contact information is up on the screen as well. We'll make sure that you all have our email addresses and all of our contact information, just so that if you want to reach out to us from the correction side or from the education side, please feel free. I think that we may have a couple questions. While Scott's looking in the chat box, is there anybody that just verbally has any questions that we can answer?
Hey, Beth, this is Shelly. I do have a good presentation and brought up a lot of things for us. I really appreciate it. I do have a question about the individuals being so young, just coming out of high school. Has there been any need or any request for some kind of financial program help, or helping them get out on their own, or because you're cutting ties, or some of them are cutting ties with their family, moving out for the first time, stuff like that. Is there any kind of starting up a living program or something?
So, Shelly, you're from Missouri, is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. And so I can't speak for DRC as far as relocation. And I know when I was part of the organization, there wasn't a stipend for any type of relocation. That may be different. I know as you get higher up with wardens and things like that, there's some of that. But for us, just looking at that generation, not to open up a whole nother can of worms, but looking at that generation, both millennial and the Zs and the folks even coming behind those folks, of trying to figure out the new term adulting. This is actually what kind of spurred this conversation on. We have a huge conglomerate in Ohio called Ohio Health, and they're a huge health organization that have lots and lots of connected clinics and hospitals. And they came to me about a year ago and said, listen, we've got 105 FTEs for medical assistants that we can't fill. We think there's a job shortage. And I said, well, there's not a job shortage, there's a job disconnect. There's a workforce disconnect. We have a lot of people that we're producing out of these career tech education facilities. They're just not coming to work for you because there's a lot of paradigms. We think they're unmotivated, and we think that they're a little bit lazy, and that all they want to do is play video games. And, are those going to be some ancillary challenges that we have with this new workforce? And so we've already started kind of addressing that. We can't really 100% answer that because our first group isn't going to come out until May. But that's definitely something that we're going to anticipate, is that this particular generation is going to pose a fair amount of challenges with the adulting piece of it. I don't know that we've actually discussed that in full disclosure, Shelley, that would that be our responsibility? We hope that, I would tell you that from the career tech standpoint in the state of Ohio, another federal mandate is they are required to do employability. And so in all of those career tech centers, they are getting all of what we call those soft skills. They're required to assess them. They're required to be tested on them. They're required to actually practice them. And so that's everything from budgeting to learning how to boil water, if you will. And so these particular students that are going to come out are going to have way less of a learning curve than an average student that you would see based on those types of standards. So we certainly are going to see that, but it's not going to be, I don't think we anticipate it being a huge issue.
Okay, thank you. If you do run across that, and you have information on it later, could you possibly send that to me or Beth, one of you two?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's something that's you're going to throw that on our radar just so we can kind of see, if that ends up being a reason that we have issues with retention, we will definitely be watching for that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hey, Shelley, this is Beth.
Yeah.
One thing that, and you have an excellent point that, we really didn't consider that. There have been some schools that, like I was at an advisory board meeting not too long ago, and they were saying, well, we don't have an institution anywhere near us. The closest institution is an hour away, which really brought up
that issue too.
Yeah, and so, I do think that is something to at least consider. And I guess I drive an hour and 20 minutes each way to work, so I don't think it's a big deal. But to an 18-year-old kid coming out who's going to get mandated for 16 hours, probably 5 days a week, that's a pretty big deal. So
yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
And so to finish my conversation on that, when we talked with Ohio Health, they too had some really big misconceptions about career tech education. We said, have you thought about going back to the vocational centers? And they said, oh no, those aren't the types of students, those aren't the type of programs, they're not robust enough. And so I noticed here on the list, we have some folks potentially on from Arizona. We actually had a huge conference call with a huge medical conglomerate out of Arizona called Banner Health. And they asked Banner, what did you do? And they said, we went back to the vocational schools and got those students before they started establishing a lot of training scars and a lot of preconceived notions and things about work and society in general. And they have had a huge success rate with recruitment and retention out of those programs. And I think we're going to see the same thing out of this program for all the same reasons.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. We have a pilot program getting ready to start in one of our vocational. Actually, he's on here right now. Orrin Barnes is going to do our pilot program, and the individuals that I met in his program are amazing individuals. I mean, they're amazing kids. They stood up when we walked in. I mean, just you could tell that they were up and beyond their years. So that wasn't really my issue. It's just those individuals I want to keep because I think they would do great in the institutions. However, it's helping them out with those life skills that they haven't got yet to make sure that they do stay with us, you know?
So again, because that strand one is very, very robust, and it talks about everything from just interpersonal communications and struggles in life, from balancing a checkbook, which I know is kind of old school now. But I would tell you that when I was in the high school teaching Fire 1, 2, and EMT, we always cross-educated with even our culinary programs for our students that didn't know how to cook. They came out of those educational processes understanding how to cook and understanding some of the things that you wouldn't necessarily get in a regular educational process. We were able to provide for them. And so another federal mandate is they have to be involved in a career tech student organization, something like FFA, BPA, DECA, Skills USA, which used to be called VICA. So a lot of people know it as VICA. And that really, really helped those students understand how to merge their education with a true industry employable skill. So there's a lot of things in place with career tech education that you don't get with a normal high school that is designed to address those concerns.
Matt,
Awesome, thank you.
Matt, if I can talk
Yes,
to you.
sir.
I'm actually teaching in one of these programs right now and working with Shelley, and we are running into this issue that the nearest prison for me is 3 hours away. And we have a lot of poverty. So what you're talking about with the CTSOs, I'm very familiar with, but we can't even have our kids sometimes be able to afford to even go to the competitions, be involved, though we do teach those basic soft skills. So what would be your suggestions on helping those out? Because I don't know that what we cover in a couple hours a day does not make up for what they're dealing with in their home lives.
Yeah, certainly. So I can tell you both, and I know you're in more of a post-secondary situation, but it also goes for that. You can use your Perkins funds. You have to be very careful. Obviously, Perkins funds are specific on how they can be spent, much like any soft money, grant monies. But I would tell you that when we talk about the CTSOs, because we feel like that's a really great vehicle, sometimes it's not always used to its fullest capacities, but that is definitely a place that you can use and be able to give the skills. Again, it costs membership, it costs registration, you got to take them to different places, but I will tell you that Perkins money can be used for that. I can talk specifically to Skills USA or the old VICA, because that's an organization that I'm actually assigned to through Department of Education. And they sell curriculum. It's called the Career Readiness Curriculum, and it's designed just for this particular purpose. And one of the things that you can use Perkins dollars is on curriculum. And so a lot of our states and a lot of our schools wrap that whole membership and registration and any kind of travel expense into a quote curriculum line item so that they can actually use that Perkins money to allow those students to have that experience where in fact sometimes they wouldn't have that ability. So and I know for a lot of because we have a lot of underprivileged, socioeconomically disadvantaged students in our districts as well. And I can tell you there's a ton of money out there for those folks. Again, from our state, we have a lot of local and state grant funds that are there to support those processes.
Yeah, and we have the career essentials, but like you said, we've got programs in our area with almost 100% free and reduced.
Yep.
So that is the kind of poverty that we're going to be dealing with. And then those kids not understanding when they get out how to really manage their money because they have nothing in their family life to actually look forward to.
And I think that makes a program like this even that much more essential for a student like that. You're talking about an absolute life-changing, breaking the cycle kind of situation for those students who have never been able to experience or see it even in their own personal life. This is an amazing opportunity. So, I wish I could give you more real specific stuff. I know in our state we have a lot of grant funds, local and state, to provide those types of services for our students.
Excellent. And a pilot school, do you have a suggestion on contacting a pilot school? Definitely, since I've got placed in this position, I haven't had anybody to talk to yet.
It's honestly, for us, it was kind of geography. We didn't want our pilot school to necessarily be a 3-hour jaunt from our institution. So we really wanted, we started kind of pulling up the map and seeing where our big correctional clusters were, and sort of drew a big 20 or 30 minute circle around that and started thinking about, again, I know those institutions are educational institutions. And so I was able to say, out of that circle, I would pick these 3. We just kind of went out and looked, scheduled some visits and made some phone calls to see, first of all, if there was interest, which was pretty much 100%. And then we kind of went out and sort of picked it. We thought we'd get 10 and got 25. So that was a little bit overwhelming at first, but so for us, I think we just picked it based on geography at first, just to make sure that our students were going to be able to have accessibility to it.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Do you have a suggestion on who to contact, as an instructor? And I primarily teach secondary, and then post-secondary is actually as an adjunct. But at the same time, being able to reach out and contact another instructor and asking them, okay, day to day, what issues are you running into?
Yeah, your Department of Education liaison, and you should have one. They may not just be law enforcement, fire EMS. Typically, what I'm seeing is it's a human, I forget what they call it now, human services cluster consultant from Department of Education typically. So they'll have everything from cosmetology to emergency dispatching, but they'll typically have that law enforcement piece. They'll know those programs, and if not, they can get you in contact with somebody who does. Ohio has a lot of other services. We have all kinds of soft grant associations, what we call third-party accreditation companies that could also help us with that process. I don't know exactly what Missouri does, but I know Missouri does have Department of Education, Career Tech Education folks that can point you in the right direction for quality programs.
Well, that's it. I'm the co-chair for Missouri on our criminal justice instructors. There is no other corrections program in our state, and that's what I'm asking you. As far as Ohio,
are there law enforcement programs in your high schools?
We do. We have 17 programs across the state, and they're relatively new. And that's why I say,
who knows them? Is it you and other folks? Because there's got to be one person that knows that helps manage those processes.
Well, it would be me and then Oscar Carter, who you're going to meet with as far as DESE goes.
Yeah, and Oscar will also have because again, one other federal mandate is they have to have quality program standards, and they get a grade based on the students that participate in the courses, the students that actually get assessed, do they pass the courses, and any of the students that actually get post-program placed into any kind of employment. So those programs are going to get a grade. I would start with the geography of it first to see which one of those programs and school districts are closest to the correctional facilities, and then I would tap into your education folks to see what grades of programs are the better grades, and then just cold call the folks.
Well, and that's what I'm looking for. You've already got them. Is there a name of a school in Ohio that you would recommend talking to?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. I can tell you, yeah, if you reach out to me, I can actually send you a list of names and phone numbers and emails.
Would you mind going back to the slide with your contact information on it?
Not a problem.
Easier said than done.
Beth is trying. Yep. Sorry about that. And so in the interim of that, if you have a pencil, I'll just throw out my email. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's
okay,
me.
I've got it.
Yep. Yes, I can absolutely. I maybe I misunderstood your question. I apologize for that. But yeah, we do have really good programs that would be worth talking to. Any other questions from anyone else? Please feel free to use that email.
Matt, this is Terry Martin from Missouri. As you can see that we are all trying to work on some specific details with our program.
Sure.
Did you get a grant?
Is there anybody on from Hawaii? I would sure like to come to Hawaii and help anybody in Hawaii. I love Missouri too, but
I wouldn't advise you to come now because it's, pretty cold. The question is that we have given Orrin, our pilot, our curriculum, but we're going to have to make manuals for the students. Was there a special grant that you guys utilized to help buy supplies for your CO1 program?
So we did everything electronically. We try to do as much paperless as possible. And so when we send it out to the actual, because in Ohio, a couple things about the Department of Education, we are not a regulatory agency. I do know that we had some folks on here from Tennessee. Tennessee's Department of Education is a regulatory agency. We are not. So we are a local control state, which means that we put out the standards, and then how those individual districts provide that education as far as curriculum and syllabus and those kinds of things. The day, how their day goes, and even some of the graduation stuff is really based on local control. With that being said, we pushed out those standards electronically and sort of put the burden on each individual one of the school districts to be able to do any kind of hard copy printing. Most of our schools, I would suspect yours do as well, have had a ton of grant money for one-to-one. So I can't think of any of our schools, even our inner city urban type districts that have a lot of high population of socioeconomically disadvantaged students, all have a one-to-one process with computers. So all of our students have access to their own laptop or tablet, and we really are more supportive of an electronic version of our curriculum for a lot of reasons. We get our weather from you, in case you don't know that. So in a day or two, we're going to get whatever you had. And so we get a lot of snow. And in Ohio, we actually, when our students are out for a specific amount of days, we still require them to fulfill assignments. And so that's why we give them the computers. They have the one-to-one, and they can continue to have a virtual educational experience even when they're not inside the classroom.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions?
Hey, again, you guys have been super awesome. Jim, thanks for having us. Again, the Iactp have been amazing. Ohio Department of Education is an actual member now, and I'm going to push membership from our standpoint at our next meeting with about 38 other Department of Educations in January in Las Vegas, because I think it's really imperative for us to have those collaborative partnerships. I would tell you that just a side note that we've even talked about having experiences with the correctional staff here. One thing that we know at Department of Education is education. One of the things that Ohio Department of Corrections knows is corrections. They don't necessarily know how to teach corrections. They just know a lot about corrections. And so we think it's a match made in heaven that a lot of our staff are going to come out and collaborate with a lot of the training staff here to help them walk through a lot of the, I know how to be a correction officer, but how do I know how to train new correction officers? And so we think that's a really great partnership that we're starting to form. We started out with that, and again, like many of bureaucratic processes, it sort of stalled out. We do have some new leadership in my department now that's really supporting this, and so we're going to see that actually be a process. So stay tuned. Maybe next year we'll have another new program that we can roll out for you that talks about how our education department has partnered again with the Department of Corrections to make even better training processes for their incumbent staff and their new hires.
Well, great job, Matt and Beth, both. Thank you for sharing. I agree with you 100%. I think it's a partnership that's been a long time coming, and we're just getting it going here in Missouri. As you can tell, we had several folks on the call today on the webinar, and I look forward to kind of comparing with you folks in the future. I think our program is actually going to be better than yours, Matt and Beth. So there's a challenge for you. The challenge for you too, Oren and Terry and Shelley. But no, seriously, great stuff. Thank you all very much, and I appreciate it. I also typed in a chat. The slideshow will be sent out to all participants. Michael will do that, and also this webinar has been recorded. It will be available on the Iactp website, so you can go back and refresh memory or whatever you thought you might have missed. So once again, thank you. Anything else, Beth, that we need to discuss before we close?
No, have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And thank you once again, Matt and Beth. This has been very valuable. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.